This is Doug Stout. It's May 29th, 2014. I'm here with Dewey Nicholl. Dewey, where were you born?
Bell Fountain, Ohio.
And what date?
5/19/1937.
When did you come to Licking County?
About 3 years ago.
And you were in the Army?
Yes.
Okay. And when did you go in?
Spring of 1960.
And when did you get out?
In 63.
Okay. So did you graduate high school and go right into the Army?
No, I went to Ohio State, graduated from there, and then the draft was breathing down my neck, so I started scouting the different Army, Navy, so forth, and the Army was the only one that would guarantee me a position when I went in. Everyone else said, oh, well, you'll probably do here, probably do there, but didn't know. So I was on a bowling team, and the Army recruiter was on also, and he kept bugging me, like, you need to go over Columbus and take tests and see what your aptitude is and blah, 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 blah. And got down to there's only one guy ahead of me from the draft board. Well, it's time to start looking.
Right.
So I did. We went over, and of course I just graduated from Ohio State, and I was used to doing reports and papers and all that. And I forget what I had the subject was, but middle of the afternoon he came by and he says, I don't know what's going on, but someone with your score is supposed to go downtown to the Army Intelligence Office for an interview. I said, what's that? He says, I don't know. So I did. Went down, knocked on the doors, all barricaded and so forth, introduced himself and so on, chit-chatted, and they said, well, I want you to write a report on something. I don't know what it was now. Gave me a blue book, and I wrote, said, well, here, okay, so, we'll let you know. So I went home. I think it was on a Thursday. On Monday, I got a call from him, said, congratulations, we have a spot ready for you at Fort Knox for basic. Be here. Well, I had a job, I had a car, I had a family, blah, blah, blah. And so, what do you do?
Right.
You went. So I went through basic. Then after basic, I was sent to Baltimore to the Army Intelligence School for 3 or 4 months. And then you graduated and they said, here's your new assignments. They're reading off this and that and the other. Came down, they had me, said, you're assigned to the Presidio, Monterey, California, to study Russian for a year. I said, what? Because in high school, before high school, 8th grade, the teacher always interviewed all the potential freshmen on their language ability. Mm-hmm. She taught Latin and all this, and I didn't know what was going on, but came back and she says, forget it, you'll never learn the language, just forget it. I said, fine. So
had you had to take any languages in college or anything?
No, okay. Never, nothing.
Okay.
Avoid. And so I ended up went to California to study Russian. I didn't do very well, and after Christmas came back and they said, you're not going to make it. I said, yeah. Says, go take a job in the supply and we'll figure out what to do with you. Well, 1960, everybody was going to Korea that got out of school.
Right.
And I thought, well, here I go. And I had a fraternity brother in the Navy, was down at San Diego. I went down there a weekend, and he took me to Tijuana and all that. And I go to San Francisco on the weekends. I got the orders to go to France for 3 years. France? Where the heck is that? Anyway, so I did. Came home for a couple of weeks, and I don't know where I flew out of. Anyway, Columbus probably. Big Air Force troop transport. And we took off. And it was basically full of dependents, wives and kids and so forth. And in Newfoundland, it broke down, and kids were crying and so forth. Then we got going again. Finally ended up in Paris. It was a 26-hour flight.
Wow.
You kind of whipped out, you know.
I guess.
And they picked me up and went down to Orleans, which is regional headquarters. And the next day they said, okay, here's your ticket. Get on the train, and at 4:13, get off. I said, what? French are very accurate. They're right on time. You just do that, and they'll be somebody there to meet you. And there I was. I nowhere and didn't speak French or anything, you know.
And were you in uniform?
Yeah.
Okay.
At that point.
Okay.
And got down there, and here's this guy. Met me. He says, hi, how are you? Blah, blah, blah. Okay. I said, come on over here. Family's parked over in the car, so walked over. Here he was. He introduced me to his wife, whose parents were missionaries in China, but I don't know how they ended up in France, but anyway. And they had a little girl, and then he had a friend who was a retired master sergeant, had gotten out in France, got out of the army, and he'd married a Russian lady.
Okay.
Well, okay. We're going along, it's about 100 miles up there, the base. About halfway up, somebody said, oh, I've got to go to the bathroom. I thought, well, you know, stop for a restroom or something. No. Just pulled over the side of the road, and everybody got out and relieved themselves back in the car. What am I getting into? And then he dropped me off at a hotel in San Jose. Said he picked me up Monday morning, and there I was at the hotel, but I had a little restaurant bar, and I didn't speak any French, you know, so I'm hungry.
Right.
This is 6 o'clock. I said, time to eat. I didn't know the French don't start eating until 8.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that's at 5 o'clock they get off work, and they stop and have a few beers and so forth, and they eventually get home. So they eat at 8 to 10, and if they're going to a movie or a theater or anything, 10:30, 11 o'clock is when that starts. And then there's another hour or two.
Right.
So you're getting out at 1 or 2 o'clock, and but then most of them are pretty tipsy. But anyway, I went downstairs to eat and had a menu. Well, that didn't really help, but somebody had given me a translator little book, and I was flipping through that. Didn't understand it, but I saw it said coffee. I'll hit that. We started. So waitress came and said, well, I'll talk cafe. Okay. She left. She came back with a little demi-tasse, like an espresso cup.
Yeah.
And talk about strong. Just about cut it, you know. So I started putting chunks of sugar in it, and that helped a little bit. Anyway, eventually I got a meal. And Monday morning, Bill stopped to pick me up. Saint-Nazaire is on the west coast of France, and they had a big shipbuilding harbor. That's where they built the France ocean liner. And we went out to the base. We started down the street, and we were surrounded by 5,000 Frenchmen on their bicycles going to work. Well, you go along with the traffic. Right. I got out, and Bill said something, well, here's your car. I said, I don't think I want to drive. I said, you will drive. Because no speed limits. Anybody on the right coming in, whether it's a cow or a semi, has priority. So you have to give right away.
Okay.
Okay. Then I found out at night they don't drive with lights on at night. In any city, you go in and you turn your bright lights out, just have your your parking lights on. And as you approach an intersection, you flip your bright lights on to let someone know you're coming. And you're fine unless someone from the right flips them on, and you stop, they go first.
Wow.
Wow, welcome.
Sounds confusing.
Yeah, but it worked out. It's a nice little installation. I was there 6 months or so, and I was there as a civilian, and we lived with in hotels and apartment houses and so on with other officers and so on that you're assigned over there, and it was quite an expression. There's half a dozen of us in the same apartment house, which had been the German Admiralty Navy headquarters during the war. They had submarine pens all over the place, big concrete bunkers.
Yeah.
And they would tie up out in the harbor till the tide come in, and they go in and unload and come back. And what they were unloading, this is a supply route for Berlin. So there were 2 freighters, American, come in the port every tide change, and they pull up and they would unload the trailers from the ship, and they had Americans scheduled from Berlin, that's a couple hundred miles away, all day long. There'd be time when they'd come down, they would drop an empty trailer, which went in empty, and
right.
Go a few feet down there, pick up full, and go back. It's constant going. Well, I was in the security business, classified and so forth, and every morning I attended the port meeting, and they announced what was coming in that day and how much classified stuff there was. It had to be really handled different than the regular.
Sure.
Back and forth and back and forth. That's really how I learned my French. They had French officials there, and the American and other people.
Right.
Okay, so I kicked it off, and then one of the occupations or jobs was that the other officers, lieutenants, captains, so on, they were stationed at the base and lived off base, and I would a lot of times go out to eat in the evening or do something, but unofficial word was that if a visiting dignitary came from a higher command, you entertained him, took him out to dinner.
Right.
So I hadn't been there very long, and the next command up at La Rochelle had an inspector, and it was a lieutenant colonel from the gendarmes or from the military police, MPs, came up, and so we all went to dinner, and I think he may have stayed a couple of days anyway. I'm not too bashful. Chit-chat about who you are and what you've done, and everyone's kind of pumping themselves up, Have you been in the military?
No, sir.
Okay. Everybody is very, very, very rank conscious. If you got your commission a day before the next guy, you have power over him.
Okay.
And it goes, whenever they meet him, what's your data rank? What's your data rank? And they didn't know about me. And so I was just there. Anyway, 3 or 4 months later, I got a call and got transferred down to La Rochelle, upper headquarters, and went in the office. And, day was over, and they said, well, time to go home. So I walked out and started to go over to my car. Here came this colonel, the MP, who was in charge of that area. I said, hi, Dick, how you doing? So I just got transferred down. Well, come on here. Come over to the officer club. So, I did a little PFC, but that's,
right.
He didn't know. So I went up and we started playing liar's dice and all this, in the bar. And my commander was a young, I think he's a second, maybe the first lieutenant, little wiry guy who had shipped his Corvette over. He was God, you know, throwing his weight around, and he'd already been in trouble with this provost marshal. I think he was passing information he shouldn't.
Oh, God.
You know, I had his job, which go out every day and check the roster and see who had been picked up downtown the night before and what happened and so forth. But I never took anything until I cleared it with the colonel. So, can I use this or not? And usually didn't. But anyway, this commander, I knew him, come strutting over the officers club, and I'd only known him, you know, a few hours, and already I could see he was a real dingbat. Nobody in the office liked him. And he walked in, and there I was with all his commanding officers, the colonels, the generals, and so on, playing dice and drinking with him, and he just looked at me like, what the hell are you doing? So we got along pretty good after that. But shortly thereafter, I got transferred out of there. I went up to Orleans, and that's where all this evolved. I had 3 installations in the command that I was in charge of all the classified information, written, verbal, everything. Yeah, pretty busy job. But I had good rapport with everybody that enlisted and the French nationals and so forth. And I got so that when something broke during the day, I'd have people just stop by and say, hey, do you know about so-and-so? Yeah, which I didn't. But then I had a chance to immediately go find out what it was all about. And when I got back to my office at the end of the afternoon, my captain just said, oh, here, take care of this. This will happen, this will happen, this will. I said, oh. And I'd hand in the report about this. Oh. Kind of threw him for a curve. But, the procedure was anything you gathered always had to be classified on how valid it was. Is it gossip or real good or really good? And mine was all good. And after about a week or two, he called me aside and he says, I'm not going to ask you anymore. He says, everything you do, you've done it, it's right. Just do it. You know? So one of the problems he had was that his commander was in one of my installations, and he started asking me to do this and do that, which was superseding the captain. So I had to be kind of touchy on all this protocol and so on. But anyway, it was great. While I was there, Kennedy was shot. The French and the Kennedys were very close. And for several months afterwards, I walked down the street, and the Frenchmen, especially the middle-aged people who had been in World War II, would come and try to express their condolences. They didn't speak any English, and I didn't really understand all the French, but it's just very moving to see the response you had from strangers. So anyway, but I did lots of traveling. In the Army, you have 30 days leave, and I was there, and I wanted to know about France and Europe and so forth. So I went to the Pamplona to the bull rides and so on. That was kind of experience, and then on down to Spain, and went to Rome a couple of times, and I went below Rome down to Vesuvius and the place had been destroyed.
Pompeii,
yeah. Another buddy, and we parked the car and looked around for 3 hours and decided it's time to head back. and I couldn't find my car keys.
Oh no.
Yes. And we looked and finally tore everything apart, couldn't find them. And finally this little Italian kid come up and he expressed a desire to help us. I mean, I said, well, in sign language, you know, I knew a little French, but didn't the Italian.
Right.
And showed him that I had a Peugeot and the steering wheel was locked and the key was out. So it wasn't a matter of jumping it and driving, and just go in circles.
Right.
So he said, he left, came back, had a hammer and a chisel and a few things, and we beat on the steering wheel. Finally got that out so I could steer. And then he was going to punch a hole in the dash to mount a switch. I said, no, just hang it. So he went up under the dash and pigtailed it, dropped the switch down. That's what I drove with from then on, just hanging in the breeze. So, but people, very, very nice, cordial, helpful, once they trust you. In Orleans, when I moved up there, I was in another hotel, and as I say, all the Frenchmen stop at their favorite bar on the way home. And so you go down, you want to stop and have a drink, get up on the stool, and early, a Frenchman sitting there at the bar with him, and I was trying my broken French, trying to talk to him, and he just didn't understand a word I said. This went on for 3 months, but you know, it's casual. And then one day he was fluent English, and I'd been told that be careful what you say, because all the French speak English and German, and he did. And after that, we were fine. But they threw me for a curve.
He just didn't trust you.
Yeah. It took that long to let him feel confident that I wasn't bullshitting.
Yeah.
So, which a lot of the guys, young guys, they talk and brag and brag. So, when I moved out the country, shared a house, and 2-bedroom, 2-story, no heat. They did have a fireplace. It was cold, we could heat it.
Right.
But I got a kerosene heater.
Okay.
Up my bedroom, and it might have snowed once or twice, but not too much, but it was cold. So I was scared to leave that burn all night. So I'd sit up on my bed and put the blankets on. When it's time to get up, I'd roll over and light the kerosene heater and go back in bed and then warm up.
That's a good way to do it, though.
But the fireplace, we were cleaning the house one afternoon, gathering up paper and so on. Let's just burn it. So we lit the fireplace, put newspapers and stuff in there, going along, about done. All of a sudden, knock on the door. There's a little gal from the bakery next door was jabbering on about all over, what she's doing. And finally, she had us come out, and the fireplace had how newspaper when it burns, it floats, had gone up out the chimney, and all the neighbors had straw roofs on their house. Oh. But the same gal was nice. I used to stop at the bakery on the way home and get a loaf or half of a loaf of bread. And one night I stopped. It was 6:30, 7 o'clock, and they were getting ready to close. Had nothing left. I said, well, no big deal, I went around, started fixing supper, and knock on the door. And here she was, a young gal, probably 18, 20. She had a whole armload of ends of bread loaves, I said, here, take it. What do? You guys?
Right.
So that's just typical of cordiality. Our landlords were great. There was 2 apartments in the complex, and Americans were over on the other side, and they said, welcome. It says, we'll let you know when it's time to pay the rent. You'll have to spend the evening over there. Well, what's this? So, but we went over, pay the rent, and all this a happy. And they didn't speak English. Spoke a little French, and talked and talked and talked, and they one day their procedure was every bottle of liquor they had in the house we had to sample.
Okay.
Every one. They'd bring them out, and they talking about food and crepes and so on, and I said something about, or maybe Bob did, about we'd had some crepes and they're really good. And Madame got up and went out, had this big skillet. Says, "I'll fix you some." And so she starts fixing them and doping them up with a little liqueur and all this and that. And we had several. By then it's 10 o'clock or so.
Right.
And we just ate at the dining room. Later on, Bob and I both flew back for Christmas, and then returned. But before we left, they said, you have to come for Christmas dinner. Well, okay, we'll be here, but certain Sunday. So we went over about 10:30, and they took us to the room next door, which is a fancy dining room. All kinds of china and silver, and just about afraid to walk in,
Yeah.
Had hors d'oeuvres and started eating, and every course Madame would get up and excuse herself and go out, take the dishes out and wash them, cook the next menu, come back, eat again. About 2 o'clock, some friends stopped by to see us. And invite them in, so they ate for a couple hours. And this went on, I think it must have been 8 or 9 o'clock that night before we got out.
Oh my goodness.
Yes, talking about being full.
I'll bet.
And I put on all kinds of weight. But super nice people. And they had a few mementos from World War II they'd gotten, and always very curious about what we did and so forth. My parents came over to visit, and the husband had a farm out edge of town, raised cattle, and he said, "Well, I'll show you my farm." Okay, so we went out. He had this house, it was vacant, but the basement was flooded, and he used the whole basement for his watering trough for the cattle. Just go help themselves,
Yeah.
And my dad, we were in farm equipment business, and he raised on a farm and so on. And he had these cattle, and there was barbed wire stretched around. But he noticed there were chains at the end of the strand at the posts, and questioned Pierre about it, and said, "Oh yeah, when we want to go in, they just have a bolt or a nail pulled up, and release the chain link, and you drive in. When you get done, you fasten it back, or if it gets aged and stretched, then you just move up a link or two."
Makes sense.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's I could go on and on, but I shouldn't. It went on, and I knew that I wanted to get a sports car.
Yeah.
And I knew if I didn't buy it in Europe, I could never afford it. And I had friends, most of them young officers, that bought different sports cars, and they would work, and then some of them wouldn't work, and not too reliable. And then there was a major that I worked with a little bit, and he'd bought a new Porsche and loved it, was so tickled and so forth. And he said, "You gotta get one of these." Well, can't afford that, So, anyway, went on. I ended up, I bought one. I'd never driven it. I just bought it. At this dealer. And ordered it and had to go to Paris to pick it up. So my roommate Bob, I had a Peugeot, and he left it at the dealer, and then he drove me up to Paris to pick the car up. And I don't know where it was, someplace downtown. Anyway, I went around, signed all the papers. I had borrowed $1,800 from a local bank, and they had no security. They didn't know what a Porsche was, anything. They just, well, okay. Loaned it to me. I had enough other cash that I paid cash for the car. I said, well, here it is. I went to get in. Nice, white. I said, where's the seat belts? Oh, they're under the seat. Well, I'm not driving in Paris without seat belts. So they finally got them put in, and I took off. Had to not run more than 3,000 RPM for the first 500 kilometers or something. So I took off, and this thing, no speed limits, and no stop signs, and all this is kind of hairy. And Parisians are really wild drivers. I mean, most of the French are. When they know that they have the right of way, man, they take advantage of that. And if they see a fancy sports car, and the roads were like 200 or 300 years old, and they had all sunk down in the ground.
Okay. And
about every half mile or so on, they would dig a drainage ditch out to the side, so water stand. And a great habit of the French was they had these little douche-chevaux, which have a canvas body, and so they just kind of bounce along.
Okay. Maybe
50 mile an hour top speed. But they would delight in passing me. And how they did that at a straight stretch of road with these bumps. And so they would drive with one wheel off the berm, and it's go like this, and finally bounce over and get in front of you. Challenge. But, anyway, I got hit 3 times with a Porsche when I was over there. Last one was coming back from Fauching in Germany just before Easter, and we're coming back and going through a little town, and a guy pulled out from the left, and I hit him head on. And I thought, oh my, it's Sunday night, what am I going to do? And I got out, the water was kind of spraying, and raised the hood, got it finally open, pulled the front of the car back, and the radiator, and it was leaking but not bad. And the Frenchman come up, and he was yelling, carrying on about, I pulled out in front of him. Well, heck, he was on the left.
Right.
He hit me. I pulled out and I hit him.
Right.
And we finally exchanged papers, insurance, and drove back to the base. And I went to my insurance agent and told him I'd had a wreck and blah, blah, blah. Okay, he processed it. Well, they went on, and I kept having an excuse why it was my fault, and I said, no, I got witnesses, and blah, blah, blah. So it's time for me to get out, come back to the States. I hadn't collected, I hadn't heard from the guy, so I gave all the papers to a friend of mine to be my attorney, and kind of half rode off. And a couple of years later, I got a note from him saying he was done with his tour and he was going to find somebody else to give my paperwork to. I thought, well, forget that. And another couple of years, I got a letter from a guy in Vietnam with a check, and he finally got it settled.
Wow.
It's like $300 or something, but
But so you never thought you were going to see that?
No. So that's kind of experience.
Now, how long were you in France then?
About 3 years.
3 years in France.
Yeah. So it's
So then when you went to come home, you told me you had the car shipped
yes.
home?
I think it cost $1,000 or something. I had to take it up to Holland someplace to some shipyards. That's what they did. They transported cars. The government, if you had an American car, they would ship it both ways, no charge. But if it was a foreign, they wouldn't touch it. So, yeah. But good car. Had it about 17, 18 years.
How long did it take for it to get here?
Oh, it seemed like it was a month or 6 weeks for. And I had an aunt lived in Wilmington, Delaware, and so I asked Dad if he wanted to go with me to pick it up. He said sure. So we went over and they took us to New York City down to the harbor someplace, found the freight line, got my car, brought it out. It was white, and they had put axle grease, real heavy stuff, on all over the car, any chrome, any trim. It's thick. And took back to their house that afternoon, and we worked, I think, a couple hours with gasoline cleaning that stuff off. But came out, and so we headed home. I asked Dad if he was on the Pennsylvania Turnpike. I said, "Do you want to drive?" And he looked at me. No, I don't think so. Never did. But over the years, there's several elderly people, by elderly 60s and so on, that were curious. And I remember one friend, I was in barbershop course, and we had a concert up at the lake, and I said, "Well, you want to drive?" "Oh, yeah." So it was stick shift, and took off, and it doesn't really get going until you go into fourth gear, and that's when it's about 65 mile an hour.
Okay.
And it's real smooth, and he's driving along. Wow, this is nice. I said, let's kind of slow down a little bit. And he looked, ooh, I'm going, I think it's up to 75.
Just didn't realize it's so smooth.
Yeah. So, people always wanted to drive it. I didn't let them.
So tell me a little bit about the metal you brought in to me. You've got a special metal.
Okay. As it said in there, during the Cuban crisis, and then when Kennedy was shot, things tightened up real tight because we were the supply route for Berlin. You know, if we're cut off, then food, all that.
Right.
And so I was diligent. I had these 3 installations that were working on supply things and armed forces and everything. And my job, one of them, was to conduct security inspections to see if they were handling classified information correctly, log it and so forth. And most of it was done by clerks, privates, and they weren't too interested in being accurate. But the rule was you had to document, log in every piece of paper and record it in the book, and when it left, you had to say if you destroyed it or what. And went on and on. My procedure was I always knew when these inspections were going to come out, and I would go at least a month ahead to all the commands and say, "Let me help you with your inspection." I'd go through, and you'd find little glitches here and there and so forth, get them all ready, and then when the inspectors came, they got a clean bill of health and they got a star. And
right.
So I did that. One time, there's a unit, I stopped into a guy, I think he's a colonel, maybe a general. Anyway, he was head of the transportation division there, and he says, "I want to talk to you." I said, "Okay." Went in, he says, I'm on a team representing the Army, and we meet at the Pentagon, and there's a Navy person and Air Force and everybody there, and we think we have a security breach. I says, oh. Well, at that time, everything was processed by punch cards.
Okay.
And I knew I couldn't, but a lot of people said, well, I can read the punch cards, you know. They know where they are and all this. And they were sure that somebody was reading the classified stuff and potentially was passing it on. But they didn't know how to catch it and to, substantiate it. And so we talked and finally decided that we would put some documents in the system and they would say, you've been caught, so forth, and fired them in. And wasn't very long later he calls and says, I'll talk to you. Yep, says, we got the guy. And he was just bubbly. And to do this, I had clearances of all kinds, but this was a higher level Pentagon thing.
Right.
And he said, did you got such a clearance? I said, oh yeah. So I went back to my boss, this guy, and said, I need such and such a clearance. And he said, what? Never heard of that. That's all right, I need it. And he said, well, okay. He made calls and so on. Came back a day or two later and called my commander and said, well, tell Nicholl he's got that clearance. I don't know what it's for. But I got it. And so I was lucky enough to have some rapport to get those things done under the table, so to speak. And my commander was a captain. He'd been in 20 years, was there. And when I was getting ready to come home, my rank was classified as far as the troops. Nobody knew. I was just a civilian. Like I told you, no curfew, no restrictions. No, I just come and go with the Americans and the French. It's beautiful.
Not bad.
And so he called me in. Well, my captain submitted this award to the colonel, and then he put it up through the chain of command and so on. I didn't know he was doing it. And then they called, and when they called me in and presented this to me, it kind of threw me for a curve. But, as you can see, they put my name, rank, and serial number right on the certificate.
Okay, yeah.
And that was then public to the office. And they said, oh, who is this guy? And so I was really upset because I really had to work to keep that classified, not only with the Americans, but the French government people. They didn't know who I was or what. And I just bluff it through, And so I came back to the office after I got that. I guess I spouted off. I was kind of pissed off about my cover was blown and all this. I'd worked so hard to keep, and I don't know what I said, probably some things I shouldn't have. But the next day, the assistant to my captain called me aside and said, you know what you did? And I said, what? He says, oh, that award you just got. And I said, yeah, I've done the thing. He said, whoa, he says, the captain gave you that, and that's the first one he's given in his 20 years of command to anybody. I thought, oh, shit. So I had to go in and apologize, of course. He was very gracious about it, but really threw me for a curve.
Not bad.
But it was a nice curve, and nobody ever challenged me that I worked with. I was working with, a few generals, but a lot of colonels and captains and so on, and they're always so curious about who you are, what's your rank, and blah 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 blah. And when I didn't volunteer that, and they got the words, we don't know who he is. Likewise, the French, who work a lot of the French officers and so forth, and have to get information like, well, these trucks that came from Berlin, they would have the French streets very, very narrow.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times if they're hauling big equipment, they had to get a different route. And the Algerians and the French were fighting, and they used plastic to blow up bridges and so on every day. And we go to these staff meetings in the morning. The French military knew where all these were planted and when they were going to blow up that day. So they have to real quick reroute.
Right.
And both ways. So it was very, very sensitive. And a couple times I was having lunch with one of my French compatriots, and lo and behold, one of his competitors came in the same restaurant. And so I had to acknowledge. He kind of looked at, they both looked at each other like, how do you know this guy?
Mm-hmm.
But, it was great experience.
Did you think about staying in?
Oh yes, but in my line of work, you were assigned someplace 4 to 6 years. Okay, then you moved, and if you happened to be married, then the family had to go, and the kids to school and so forth. And after another 4 or 5 years, then you pack up and move someplace else.
Okay.
And the thing was, I basically worked 24 hours a day. I was always on call. And something happened during the day that had to be taken care of, you took care of it. You didn't go home. Mm-hmm. And this would happen to the families. The husband would get a notice to stay, and he had no way to contact his wife or the kids. He wouldn't be home for a day or 2 or 3. And they're out here in the boondocks.
Right.
I thought, that's great. I love it, but it ain't what I want to do.
Mm-hmm.
I get tied down. So I debated. I extended it a couple of times, and it wasn't working. It wouldn't work. So I just said, "Thank you. Get the heck out." And,
so what did you do when you got out?
well,
What did you go to school for? What was your at OSU?
I graduated in agricultural economics.
Okay.
Never lived on a farm, but the family had this international harvester dealership, trucks, tractors, and hardware store, and all this. And so it's kind of where I got the bug. Anyway, I graduated, and are you familiar with the OSU campus?
No, not very well.
They have the big main campus, and then the river, and across the river is Ag College, where
Okay.
their courses are. Okay, you had to catch the bus on the main campus to get over, be there in time.
Okay.
Okay, then majority of the students were farm boys. They raised on a farm. They knew about cows and corn and all this,
Mm-hmm.
and most of them were very sociable. And at the end of the class, the bell rang, and you had to get your fanny out of the seat and get out to get on the bus, or you'd miss it.
Right.
And the next class was shot. So I didn't have that luxury of chit-chatting with the other guys, and they did, came along fine. I really struggled. We had a course where you would classify animals, cows or pigs or so on, and rank them like you do in a fair.
Mm-hmm.
And that was tough. I thought I had down what was good and bad. I just blew it completely. Didn't think I was going to make it through there, but anyway, it's I lived on the main campus. I was in a fraternity, and we had parties 1 or 2 every weekend,
Mm-hmm.
and nonstop, and so forth. A busy time. Beautiful experience, as far as that goes. But then after the service, I came back home, and my mother had had cancer off and on for 15 or 20 years. She'd beat it and then she'd get her and so forth. And she hung on until I got home and died a week later.
Oh my goodness.
And my dad was a worker, and mother took care of the house, did the groceries, paid the phone bill, all that. He never did any of that. All of a sudden, bang. What do I do? Well, I just took over because he couldn't handle it. And then after a couple of years, he got remarried to a family friend who'd been a friend of my mother and my sisters, and his business relationship, all that. And a very nice lady. She was a go-getter, big Eastern Star lady, and loved to travel. And they traveled all over, not in the United States, but Europe and Far East, and just nonstop. They were married 15, 20 years, and he finally had a heart attack when he was 85, passed away. She lived to be 92 or 3. But anyway, I went back to work then for the store, and they put me in the parts department. I had an uncle that ran it, but he was crippled up and old school. He knew something, and that's all in his head,
Right.
And I had new books, and I computerized the inventory on cards and got into the reordering the stocking. And then a year or two later, another uncle who ran the business got sick with Parkinson's, and finally he just passed out, couldn't come to work anymore. So one day I went in and said, "Okay, you're in charge." Well, I didn't know anything about the books and pricing.
Right.
I had an aunt that was kind of the bookkeeper. Her husband had, and my dad went into business back in 26, and then he died in the 30s sometime, and she came in as bookkeeper, and then another uncle came in and kind of ran the business, but I didn't know sick really about doing it, but I did. And then in 79, 80s, there was a big grain embargo by the government, and interest was up 22% and everything. And the Russians weren't buying any grain anymore, so farmers were hurting, and so we were hurting. And after 6 weeks or so, International Harvester had a big computer, and they would let farmers go in and put in all of their input, the crops they were planting, what kind of equipment they had to harvest it, how quick it could be done, what the weather would be, and animals, and they allocate time to mow the grass if you're going to have a picnic or something. Very involved, very sophisticated, and then they would let us kind of, we were computerized, run our inventory and do some stuff. And they kept coming back, well, are you going to make any money? And we do projections and so forth. And the senior partners were all up in their 60s, 70s, and they said, well, we don't want to pour any money back into this thing. It looks like it's a dead horse. So we closed. And so there I was in my 40s. Well, what do I do now?
Right.
And so by chance, a guy from Lima called and wanted to sell us a computer. Well, I had one. I got to talk to him and went up, and he kind of showed me his setup. He had an office supply place, and ended up going to Dayton. There's another guy down there that specialized in selling computers to farm elevators and to farmers. Very sophisticated thing. And I worked there for a couple of years, and nothing was happening in Bell Fountain. And the Radio Shack store had Radio Shacks they were selling occasionally, and I knew the owner, and he showed me a little bit, and that was way, way, way back. And so my wife and I just decided to open our own store. So we did. And got hooked up with a guy in Chillicothe, the phone company. They were cranking up computer stores. And went down and arranged. He furnished me all the computers I needed on loan.
Right.
And I remember at Christmas, I borrowed a friend's pickup and went down and got a whole load of Apple's computers.
Yeah.
And brought them back and sold them. And went on and on. Then we eventually moved a time or two and got into the IBM and stuff. And got in with the schools and business and so forth for the next 15 years. And my son came in. He had a full ride at Columbus College Art and Design and went. And at the end of the first year, he had mono and everything.
My goodness.
And came home and he slept all summer, basically, and then started going to Ohio Northern on art. Went there for a year and a half, and they always had outside professionals come into the art classes and show what they did and explain what they were doing, how they were living, did they have an income, most of them had a sugar daddy, just under it. And Chris is very inquisitive. He would get on to him, what are you doing, how you doing, so forth. And he said he could see at College College Art Design, the only people who had computers back then were the seniors. Everybody else was hand doing everything. Mm-hmm. And so it's in your future. And the future is you make Christmas cards or birthday cards. And so I'm going to sit on my butt the rest of my life. So he quit at Thanksgiving, came home one day and says, well, I quit school. You what? Yep. No use wasting my time and your money. What are you going to do? Well, he had a couple part-time jobs and had worked a little bit with me on the computers. After Christmas, he said, can I come work for you? I said, yeah. Because I'd grown enough that initially I did everything, and I couldn't handle it.
Right.
And so he took that over and did a fantastic job. And after a couple, 3 years, he tangled up with a lady from Richmond, Virginia, and ended up moving out there. She had a couple kids, and got 2 or 3 jobs in computers in Richmond, and they'd be fantastic things. They go 100 miles an hour and then they'd crash. And so I finally ended up at the Virginia Department of Transportation for the whole state as a technician, and started working there. And right away he noticed that there were closets always full of software updates. Periodically they improve the programs and so forth. And just sitting there, and some were several years old. He got to asking them, what's going on? Oh, we don't touch that. All right, we're working all right. And went on and on. Finally, his boss said, well, if you want to try it, they had a procedure they ran every weekend. It took 24 hours to update. And Monday they're ready to go again. I said, see what you can do. So we went in on the weekend and did what he does. And Monday morning came back, and the boss said, well, how'd it go? I said, oh, okay, here, I'll show you. I went over and started to do that upgrade again. And I guess the boss about froze.
Right.
No. That's okay. And it took about half hour instead of all day. Well, here's this young kid. He was 30 maybe, and a lot of the people at the department all up over the state is 80-some offices. When they wanted a computerized, they went out and bought one, and none of them talked to each other.
Right.
And when he did this, he said half of the staff were younger people, but they'd been there 15, 20 years. Then you had some older folks. And the young ones had a dilemma. So who is this guy? Does he really know that much? Do I get on his wagon, or do I continue to sabotage him? A lot of turmoil. and this word spread throughout the state. Here's this guy that, well, Chris had gone to a couple conferences nationwide with Novell. They were troubleshooting, had some problems, and they talked and talked and talked. And these are all guys that had gone to Harvard and Yale and so on, had all kinds of degrees.
Mm-hmm.
And they came to a break time, and when they broke, well, everybody kind of gathers around. I'm so and so, and I've got this degree and so forth. And came to Chris and said, "Well, Chris, where'd you go to school? What degree do you have?" I said, "Well, my folks had a computer store. They sent me to Boston to Novell for a week. That's it." I said, "What?" And right after the break, they were still trying to figure this out. And he held up his hand, "Try this, blah, blah, blah." They fixed it. And right away, Novell tried to hire him to supervise the East Coast.
Wow.
New York, Washington, the whole thing. He said, "Nah, I know that would be a non-stop job.
Mm-hmm.
You're always on call. You've got a family, you're going to do it." So he didn't take it. But I went on, he's advanced quite a bit there, transportation department. He started a couple of years ago. They were trying to upgrade, and they had the same problem of compatibility, getting to be tied to the office with all the state agencies. And they had a lot of old farts that had done it this way and not going to change.
Right.
So they hired a couple companies to write new network systems, and they didn't work. And so they hired Chris to write one. He's been out about 2 years now. He's got his own staff now and so forth, and pretty much can come and go.
Well, that's great.
So I'm very, very proud of him.
Oh, I bet. Should be.
And he's just a common old guy. Both his grandfathers were mechanical geniuses. They always fixed everything.
Mm-hmm.
My dad, World War II, I asked him once why he didn't join the Army. He said, "Well, they wouldn't let me." I said, "What do you mean?" He says, "They told me that I had to stay local to keep the farmers running." And he did. I mean, back then, it's before your time, but something broke. They probably didn't have a part. You had to finagle and improvise and make something else.
Right.
And back then, there were still some horses, quite a few of them getting tractors, but there weren't any available to get. And so he stayed there. My wife's father, his family, were kind of genius too. Back in the 30s, they built a couple, 3 Airstream trailers, but they were self-propelled.
Okay.
So they had the smooth nose on them, and they'd take a Chevy engine, a Hudson transmission, all these parts that put them together, and they had health problems, so they would. There's 3 of them. The older generation went first to Florida. They'd stay for a month and live in that.
Mm-hmm.
Then they come back and another family go, and so forth. And Judith's family, she had 3 brothers, and they'd drive down, park on Daytona Beach, and Dad would go fishing. He had sinus and everything.
Right.
You know, and she was left there with 4 kids. Well, this is such a novel piece of equipment. It was self-propelled, had the round nose, and
Mm-hmm.
self-propelled, and had dishwasher,
Wow.
and all this. And people were so curious, they had said, "Can I see it? Can I see it?" They're constantly coming in and out all day, seeing what they had. And she was home trying to take care of the kids and
Mm-hmm.
cook and all this. And I guess the last time they came home, they had radiator problems, and her job was to keep pouring water in the radiator all the way back to Florida. So anyway, but the story goes, at home, his home, if they got anything to do, toys or clocks, whatever, as soon as they got there, within hours he had it stripped out and all apart, and he just put it back together.
Mm-hmm.
just very, very smart.
Mm-hmm.
And,
Some people are like that.
Yeah. And so my son, I think, came by it honestly.
Right.
I picked it up some from my dad, but he couldn't stand still. He just fixed it. And he bought me a car when I graduated from high school, old clunker. And he says, this is all right, but we've got to overhaul it. So, okay. So we put it in the shop, and he tore the engine down and blah, blah, blah. I got ready to put it back together and put the bearing caps on. He says, I think I should do that. That's pretty important. So what am I to say? So go ahead. Put it together, fired it up, and really didn't have any oil pressure. He looked, tried this. Finally took it back down, and he put one of the caps on backwards. But he fixed it, and I drove it while I was in high state. And created a car.
That's good.
Yeah. Went on from that. I went into the computer business, and then I hired more people. I think there was 6 or 8 of us at one time. And my wife had a lot of health problems. Couldn't really get any good help in Belfast. And decided it was time for me to quit. So I had a good service manager, real go-getter, honest, and worked out a deal and sold it to him and retired. And then to keep busy, I stumbled onto a little radio station up at the lake and started selling ads for it.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually I moved. The guy had another station in Marysville, so I started going over there and trying to crank that market up. And, my daughter teaches at New Albany. She and her husband lives at Johnstown. And when they were small, she went to all the games. She was a coach. And when the littlest one was still in kindergarten, my wife was sick, and she moved to Johnstown and ended up doctors here in Newark. And she would go out and babysit the younger one while mom and dad and the other sister went to school.
Mm-hmm.
And Judy would take her to kindergarten in the afternoon. I worked pretty good, but it didn't last because my wife was very impatient. She's a musician, and everything has to be just so. The kids wouldn't practice, and so on. So then they invited me to come over. I used to come over on the weekends and play with the kids till bedtime and drive back. It was over 100 miles each way. And so they talked me into coming to Newark and so forth. So been here ever since.
Well, that's good. We're glad you're here because I'm glad we got your story.
So am I.